Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Yes, welcome to this briefing session. So this is the second in our Scottish Consumer Trends breakfast briefing, presenting research carried out by TWC on our behalf. So as Colin says, my name is Ylva Haglund. I'm the Head of Sustainability and Engagement here at the Scottish Wholesale Association. And we're really pleased to be working with TWC to provide our members and industries with insights and support to help them through the tough times that we're having and plan for the future, and also hopefully find new opportunities. And this very much also applies to the area of sustainability. So we are very committed, hence I suppose also why I'm here, to supporting our sector to explore opportunities and find solutions to make our industry more efficient, profitable, and ultimately also net zero in terms of carbon emissions. So just the next slide, please. Thank you. So some of the work that we've done in this area is listed on this slide, including, you'll see the Delivering Growth Through Wholesale project, where we've been introducing local suppliers to the wholesale market and working to strengthen the Scottish local supply chain and access to local food and drink for consumers in Scotland, who are increasingly demanding environmentally responsible retailers and businesses. And this, of course, is the very topic that we're here today to discuss. So let me hand over to Sarah Coleman, Director of Communication at TWC. There will also be time for questions in the and at the end of the presentation. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm just going to very briefly outline who we are at TWC, and then I will get straight on with sharing the content that we have today on sustainability and consumer trends. So TWC, for those of you unfamiliar with us, we're a data and digital consultancy, and we harness data to empower wholesale, convenience and food service. We essentially offer three key services. TWC Technology is our data platforms, which report mostly wholesale shipments data, as well as in some cases retail EPOS data for our wholesale clients, which is then also accessed by their suppliers. So CJ Lang is one of our clients. We run the SPA Scotland sales track service, and we've just onboarded UWS. Another important client for us is Unitas. We run the Unitas data service. So that gives you a bit of a sense of who we're working with there. In terms of TWC consulting, our understanding of what works and what doesn't within the wholesale channel is born out of our experience, and our specialism is supporting in particular smaller suppliers who have perhaps limited resource dedicated to the wholesale channel, or perhaps are new to the channel, or even looking at it as a potential growth area. And finally, TWC Trends, which is why we're here today. That's really about getting behind the why of what is happening in wholesale. And we use various methodologies to do that, whether that's speaking to consumers, to retailers, to operators. And we can also actually run bespoke studies for yourselves with our unique emphasis and understanding of the wholesale channel. In terms of what I'm sharing with you today, this comes from our TWC Trends Summer 22 edition, which was a consumer study with a sample of 1,000 consumers, nationally representative of the UK. The research was conducted in June. In addition, in collaboration with the SWA, we boosted our Scottish sample, so an additional 400 Scottish consumers, in order to allow us to really unpick results within the region specifically, as well as benchmark what's happening against the total UK picture. In terms of the sort of plan and agenda for today's short session, I'm going to start with some general trends around sustainability and what consumers are telling us, and also in relation to how they're doing their grocery shopping. So a kind of retail section first. I'll do a short summary and there'll be an opportunity to ask some questions at that point. And then we'll move on to our food service section, which will again close with a summary, and then we'll wrap up with a Q&A session at the end. So do ask, or do think of any questions that you'd like to ask as we go through. So I think probably worth saying up front, one of the challenges is that sustainability means very different things to different people, and of course is relevant in different ways depending on the industry that you're working in. I read an article the other day that described sustainability as one of the most overused buzzwords of the current times. And so I guess a small watch out with any consumer research, including this, is that you need to bear in mind that different consumers will interpret what sustainability means in different ways. And it could mean any or all of the below terms, and perhaps many more things besides. So it can be about local sourcing, supporting local businesses. It can be about recycling, renewables, carbon neutral and net zero. It can be about food waste. It can be about food miles. Broadly, it tends to relate to any effort to reduce impact on the environment. But I guess at its very broadest, sustainability is about future-proofing. I think one of the key things to say here is, in terms of your own businesses, I guess it would be thinking about how you can demonstrate how you're supporting the sustainability agenda. And I'm not talking about greenwashing, I'm talking about making your customers and potential customers aware of what you're doing in this space, whether that's about using renewables, recyclable packaging, electric vehicles, communicating through relevant channels, whether local magazines, newspapers, on your social media, within your outlet, on your menu, will all help for consumers to understand what you're doing. And as we'll come to see, it does have an impact on the choices that consumers are making. So in terms of the first sort of stat that I want to share with you, here we've asked consumers whether environmental and sustainability issues are influencing where they shop for groceries. And we see that around 3 in 10 consumers are saying that it does influence where they shop for groceries. We can see that the Scotland figure is slightly lower at 27% against 31% for the UK. And my hypothesis on that is that it could be because more shoppers in Scotland are currently struggling financially, which we saw very clearly in our previous webinar on the cost of living crisis. In the same study, we also saw a huge uptake in the discounters, particularly in Scotland, which is suggesting that value is really the biggest priority right now. This is also borne out in terms of how that has changed versus our previous study in autumn last year. So in 6 to 9 months' time, what we've seen is quite a significant drop in the proportion of people saying that environmental and sustainability issues are affecting where they shop for groceries, a fall from 38% to 27%, and this is within the Scottish region. Perhaps inevitable with the cost of living crisis, but I think we'd all agree that's quite a significant decline. However, what we are also seeing is that consumers continue to expect retailers to take these issues seriously. And we're seeing this more so with Scottish consumers than within total UK. So 62% of Scottish consumers are saying that food retailers who don't take sustainability or environmental issues seriously are likely to lose out in the future. And as we can see, that's markedly higher in Scotland against the UK at 53%. Similarly, we're seeing a suggestion that consumers see the onus on businesses rather than perhaps on their own actions, because we see 63% of consumers agreeing that they expect all companies to be focused on sustainability and their environmental impact. Again, this is higher in Scotland than UK. Interestingly, it is older consumers who are more likely to agree, despite perceptions perhaps that younger consumers are more the climate warriors. But perhaps this is about the fact that younger consumers are more willing to take action themselves, whereas older consumers are expecting the businesses to do it for them. The bottom line, are people willing to pay more for a sustainable choice? Well, half of consumers, 50%, are saying that they want to make sustainable choices, but they're not willing to pay extra for this benefit. And this is around the same level in the UK. Again, it feels like the expectation is that businesses should be picking up the cost. But perhaps it's about affordability rather than willingness to pay a premium. After all, we saw in the previous webinar that 2/3 of Scottish consumers are feeling the pinch, and therefore it's perhaps not unreasonable to assume that many shoppers can't justify paying a premium for a sustainability benefit. But again, if we go back to last time, we saw that it was in particular younger consumers and those with children in the household that were most likely to say that they were struggling to pay their bills. Conversely, if we look at that 50% of Scottish consumers, we can see that it's actually older shoppers and those without children that are most likely to agree that they're not willing to pay extra for sustainability benefits. Therefore, it seems to be less about affordability and more about willingness to pay for this benefit. When we ask consumers whether they think that shopping in convenience stores is better for the environment, we get quite a mixed picture. 25% of Scottish consumers agree that they think that shopping in convenience stores is better for the environment. A similar proportion, 28%, disagree, and then quite a few are sitting in the middle, unsure. Within the UK, we see a larger proportion agreeing that they think that shopping at convenience stores is better for the environment, and consequently, a smaller proportion disagree. So convenience stores are commonly visited on foot. Many staff also walk to work at the store. They support the local economy. Some stores are really strong supporters of local suppliers. And it's generally agreed that you can achieve less food waste by buying little and often, a behaviour that we see in smaller stores. However, perhaps there is an awareness of the logistics of delivering to a network of small stores, which is driving that right-hand side of the chart. Or it could also be broader perceptions of convenience stores, where some consumers see them as expensive and some see poor standards. What we do see is agreement over half of consumers saying that convenience stores could do more to demonstrate the sustainability or environmental credentials. And we'd agree, talking up the environmental benefits of walking to the store, collaborations with local businesses, driving the local economy, as well as referencing the many initiatives being rolled out by the wholesalers that serve these stores. We believe there's a role for symbol groups to coordinate this activity. Currently, we see the multiple grocers are well ahead on demonstrating their sustainability credentials, and many have significant dedicated resource to support such initiatives. For instance, Asda recently released a really long environmental, social and governance report, and they also have an exec director dedicated to sustainability initiatives, and importantly, the communication of what they're doing. So to wrap up that section, I've got 3 key takeaways for you. So sustainability is influencing where just over a quarter of Scottish shoppers are shopping for groceries, which represents a fall from 38% last year. Undoubtedly, the hunt for value has overtaken as a priority, and that's really reinforced by the data that we shared last time, which of course we can also make available to those who missed it. We see half of consumers, and in particular those aged 55 plus, are not willing to pay a premium for sustainability benefits. It feels like the expectation is that businesses should be focused on their impact, and therefore the suggestion is that they should be absorbing additional costs. And there are mixed views on the environmental impact of shopping at convenience stores, in particular in Scotland, but there is consensus that the sector could do more to demonstrate its sustainability credentials. Does anyone have any questions at this stage before we move on to the food service section? Okay, I'll carry on and then you can save up your questions for the end. Okay, we shared this slide in the last webinar, but I think it's worth repeating just to highlight again that consumers anticipate changing their behaviour in relation to eating out. And in particular, that's going to be around reducing the frequency of eating out occasions. So we can see that Scottish consumers, 58%, agree that they will eat out less often, which is way higher than the figure for the UK. Again, that will relate to the higher proportion of consumers struggling to make ends meet. And we see a similar proportion to the UK, around a quarter of consumers saying that they plan to spend less when they do eat out. And they'll use mechanics like choosing cheaper establishments, having fewer courses, or perhaps not drinking alcohol when they eat out. In terms of willingness to pay more for a sustainable choice when eating out, 4 in 10 consumers say that they're happy paying slightly more if it means making a more sustainable choice when eating out. And when we're talking about a more sustainable choice, I sort of refer you back to my first slide, which is, what exactly a consumer is meaning by that is, of course, open to interpretation, because that 4 in 10 figure feels pretty high. But I think what we can presume is that this is likely to be deprioritised as the cost of living crisis bites, particularly in line with what we've seen with grocery shopping. In terms of Scotland versus the UK, we can see the figure in Scotland is slightly lower. If we take that national figure of 41% of consumers saying that they are willing to pay slightly more if it means making a sustainable choice, and we look at what that looks like by age group, we can see that it is younger consumers that are more likely to agree with that statement. So over half of 18 to 34-year-olds say that they're happy to pay slightly more for that sustainable choice. We also see some regional differences. So again, looking at that 41 as the sort of benchmark, here we can see by region. So we've got the Scotland figure at 39, just behind the UK average, but we can see a real peak there in London at 57%, as well as Wales and West there at 48. Now, you might expect Scotland to be higher, in line with Wales, where there is also a strong focus on locally produced food and drink. However, I think we can understand this by bearing in mind again that Scottish consumers are more likely to be struggling, and therefore this is probably once again a case of value being the biggest priority. In terms of London, I can relate that in terms of that higher index of younger consumers, because there's a higher proportion of younger consumers in the capital. But also in London, we've seen a large number of dedicated restaurants focused on sustainability credentials. So there is a bit more of a focus within the capital on some of those concepts. We're also seeing consumers making the link between seasonal and UK sourcing and sustainability. So 61% of consumers are agreeing that choosing seasonal produce is a good way to follow a more sustainable diet. And a similar proportion agree with the statement that they believe that produce sourced in the UK is always more sustainable than imported produce. In terms of that relationship around sustainability and seasonality, we can see that older consumers are more likely to agree that choosing seasonal produce is a good way to follow a more sustainable diet. But also we see a greater confidence amongst 55+ consumers around knowing what fruit and vegetables are in season at different times of the year. Now, amongst the older consumers within that 55+ age group, I guess they're going to be remembering a time when there wasn't the same availability of all food and drink products throughout the year, and therefore would have got used to buying whatever was in season. I guess younger consumers will have got used to pretty much everything being available all year round, and therefore are arguably somewhat less attuned to what's in season when. So to wrap up that short section then, eating out we know will be less frequent, and so I think it's fair to say that expectations will be high, and offering a point of difference or experiences that can't be replicated at home will be key. Sustainability can be a point of difference. For example, some of the London concepts that I referred to earlier, so places like Warehouse in Covent Garden, Adam Handling's restaurant The Frog, Silo in Hackney, Rabbit in Chelsea, lots of these restaurants are making sustainability as a real point of difference and encompassing foraging, farm to fork concepts, zero waste, seasonal menus, high welfare meat, and supporting local producers. And again, expectations from consumers are higher, and when they do go out, they may well actively seek out places that give back to the planet. However, I think it's fair to assume that, as we've seen for grocery, sustainability as a source of added value will be deprioritised as the cost of living bites and consumers have to prioritise value for money. And it makes sense for operators to adopt seasonal menus, increase those plant-based options, and repurpose food destined for waste in an effort to increase efficiency and reduce costs, as well as drive sustainability credentials. And it's really encouraging to see lots of restaurants and food producers really getting behind some of these trends. Last week, I was at the Speciality and Fine Food Fair, and there was an incredible amount of innovation around making plant-based a first choice and, for instance, repurposing foods that would have otherwise been discarded. So some really interesting trends emerging, but also that tie up very nicely with what we're seeing within food service as well. Okay, so that's sort of the end of the content that I wanted to share with you. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you so much, Sarah. Any questions for Sarah, either in the chat or feel free to put your camera on and ask questions as well.
John Murray, I'm just wondering, I read, I think a couple of months back about Lidl, I think trialling a kind of a traffic light system. Is there any, I know that's maybe looking ahead rather than looking at actual, but is there any progression on a kind of traffic light system on menus and in food service, but on retail packaging, etc., so that it's easier for the consumer to identify products that are more sustainable?
I probably know only as much as you do on this, in as much as I've read about sort of proposals for this kind of labelling. And I mean, it does make a lot of sense because, of course, unless you're really eagle-eyed, some of this information is pretty hard to spot. In some ways, I'd say you see it more actually in food service in terms of menus highlighting products that meet certain criteria in terms of sustainability, or some restaurants have really backed this and kind of talk about how many miles each ingredient has come from. But my sense is that that's still quite niche right now, and it isn't regulated, or it's not universal.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can maybe come in there a bit, John, as well. So this is kind of a hot topic within the world of sustainability, and the Scottish Government and others I think they formed a sort of working group, but there's definitely a review of all the different packaging, labelling relating to this. I think the first thing that they've started with is looking at all the different types of, because there are already so many symbols, so much information that needs to go on packaging, but this is underway. And in terms of, just as you said, Sarah, in food service, so I'm originally from Sweden, and there for the last, I want to say about 6 or 7 years, and you really started to see a lot more on menus, certainly within sort of fast food settings, but elsewhere as well, where it says this is a low carbon meal, this is I think it's a really interesting area that I'm hoping that SWA can also get more involved in. Yeah, and I see your comment, as long as we do it UK wide and not special packaging for the Scottish market. Yeah, there are a lot 100%. Of things about here in terms of making it consistent, making it also transparent, so that we can actually show what that labeling means, and it needs to be really a whole kind of life cycle, I would say. And so a lot of work still to come on that, but we'll keep an eye on that one for sure. Great question, thank you. Anyone else with any questions for Sarah? I do have otherwise a quick one before 9:30, unless no one else has any just now, and that's, I think, is really interesting around the convenience angle. I think there is surely an opportunity here for the convenience sector to showcase its sustainability and its kind of place in our communities. So I wondered what your view is, Sarah, on how the convenience sector could do more to showcase their sustainability work.
Yeah, I mean, I think I alluded to some of this at the time of sharing that slide. I think it's really interesting because I think although I can see the logistics of getting products to convenience stores is more complex. Actually, on the other side of that chart, there's an awful lot of things that convenience stores have going for them in terms of benefits around sustainability. But I think currently it's just not, or for the most part, it's not talked about a great deal. So I think there's a huge opportunity to do a better job of raising awareness of what's happening anyway. This isn't about sort of blindsiding people. It's about talking about what's already happening. And I think the supermarkets do it better just because they have so much more resource at their fingertips and dedicated departments. But yeah, I think that's a really genuine opportunity to talk about local sourcing and all the opportunities around that.
Yeah, I agree. Really interesting. I think we're drawing to close. Sarah, see a comment, yeah, again about communication, and I think there is something here about reviewing how we should be doing this, probably across sectors, you know, and together with other trade associations and other parts of the food and drink supply chain. Does the review of Taste Our Best address this, provide the tools to hospitality operators? Colin, any views on this one?
It's a good question. Certainly the review is underway. I don't think it does, John, and it goes partly back to, you know, what is that comms piece, what is that standardisation, but it's certainly something we can feed into the review that's ongoing at the moment.
I see it all too often, do you know what I mean? And it's just too broad, and it is down to ultimately the hospitality operator that's printing the menu or making the menu, whatever. But I think a lot of them actually miss a trick, and they just say the meat's from the butcher or whatever. I just think that more toolkits that they can give to people to highlight it to those that are savvy about sustainability, you know, it encourage more business. So yeah, more tools within that kind of food tourism piece for the operators, the better, and then making sure that they are using them.
No, absolutely, John.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Right, the time is 9:30, so it is the end of our session for now. Thank you so much to Sarah Coleman, TWC, and for all the work that you've done for us as well at the Scottish Wholesale Association. Thank you very much for joining. If you have any questions or would like to continue the conversation, please don't hesitate to get in touch with myself or Colin, and I hope to see you all very soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.